all women are different, but they are all women. This video is androcentric from a men's point of view and is presented as opinion, commentary, and debate. Expressing opinions is not violence. These are ideas to challenge, question, and argue in public because classical liberalism relies on the First Amendment for its dialectic. If you are a feminist, then consider this. If patriarchy truly existed as claimed, feminism could not. And if all men are trash and women are equal to men, then what are we to conclude? Women will die for their children, men will die for their wives and children, and God chose to die for all mankind. Authority rolls up with responsibility. If this framing of facts offends you, click off to a cute cat video. Proceeding further will expose you to gamma bias and criticism directed at ideas, claims, institutions, not at any individual's virtue or dignity. Our method follows the 7 liberal arts: the trivium, grammar, logic, rhetoric, and the quadrivium, arithmetic, geometry, music, and astronomy, and the transcendentals, the good, true, and beautiful. If this framework is not for you, feel free to exit now. It's no disgrace. Women are wonderful. God bless America. Men are great. Feminismus Delendis 8. The Modern Man's Guide to Life, written by Conrad Riker. Available now, links in description. The Modern Man's Guide to Life, a field guide for men who still notice reality. The unpaid interns of the apocalypse. How globalist Mammon and the female tribunal sold you a fake rebellion to uproot the Western spirit and the sword of Logos required to reclaim reality. You've been sold a counterfeit reality, brother, a cheap plastic knockoff of the good, the true, and the beautiful, stamped with a corporate barcode and sold to you as rebellion. Look around you. The modern world is a high-tech Babylon, a gynocentric amusement park, where the descent is manufactured in a boardroom. The revolution is sponsored by BlackRock. And the only sin remaining is the old-fashioned Western virtue of competence. You feel it in your gut, a phantom limb of the spirit, because you are a man of the West, hardwired for the logos, for dialectic, for the tough gristle of reality. Yet you are force-fed a diet of soy-soaked sophistry and sentimental lies. They told you that toxic masculinity was the enemy while they dismantled the apprenticeship mastery ladder that built the cathedrals and the moon landings. They screamed about equity while they stripped the fathers from the home, turning the family court into a literal demolition derby of due process, where a woman's accusation is the new Inquisition and the presumption of innocence is a patriarchal hate crime. Do you think it's an accident that the modern counterculture is just a payroll for the weak? The corporate mammon feeds on your destruction, weaponizing the gamma male's envy and the feminist's solipsism to replace the trivium with trigger warnings, trading the grammar of definition for the rhetoric of grievance. You see it in the suicide rates of discarded fathers, in the cuckoldry rates hidden by the academic-industrial complex, and in the chemical castration of a society that treats the nuclear family as a threat to the state. I'm here to hand you the red pill hammer, forged in the fires of natural law and tempered by the cold steel of syllogism, to shatter this funhouse mirror. We are going to dissect the living spirit of the West. Aristotle's phronesis, the Stoics' apatheia, and the Roman virtus, and wield them like battle axes against the degenerate demons of Marxism, feminism, and the simulation of revolt. It's time to stop being an unpaid intern in your own enslavement. Let us descend into the underworld of the truth, slay the lie, and return with the fire of the gods. The simulation of revolt, how corporate mammon weaponizes weakness. Civilization is the process of setting man free from men. When Ayn Rand scribbled that she wasn't gesturing at the modern spectacle of the rebel, a creature who bleats for freedom while signing the very payroll of his master. We must dissect this fraud with the scalpel of the trivium, beginning with the grammar of the grift. Consider the woke stakeholder, that ubiquitous viral activist or diversity consultant who functions as a tapeworm in the gut of the economy. This entity claims to stand against the patriarchy, yet every dollar of their subsistence is extracted from the productive labor of men. Here is the syllogism that destroys them. Major premise, a parasite cannot survive without a host. Minor premise, the modern corporate dissident relies entirely on corporate subsidies and state grants. Conclusion. Therefore, the rebel is not a freedom fighter, but a dependent child biting the hand that feeds it. This is the simulation of revolt. It is a managed conflict where the stakes are zero and the only winner is the blob of corporate mammon. Do not be deceived by the shrill theatrics. This is not dissent, but a resource extraction machine. We are watching the weaponization of frailty. By promoting the hysterical, the incompetent, and the perpetually insulted, the corporate state creates a loyal caste of mid-wit flatterers, gamma males and scolds, who realize they cannot survive on merit. They skip the apprenticeship mastery ladder, that noble arduous climb from novice to master, because they possess no skill, only grievance. They are raised to positions of influence, not because they can build, but because they can destroy. Examine the rebel supply chain closely. Big tech and legacy media, the jewel pillars of the managed consensus, act as the HR department for the cathedral. They promote the weak to ruin the strong, creating a false hierarchy where the man who cuts off his genitals is hailed as a brave leader, while the man who builds the bridge is examined for his tax returns. Let us apply the logic of the trivium to the oppression narrative. The left screams that the West is a tyrannical patriarchy. If this were true, if the West were truly the fascist hellscape they imagine, they would be silenced. In a real tyranny, dissent is met with the gulag, not a tenure track at a prestigious university. The fact that they can scream oppression from rooftops, corporate podiums, and Netflix specials is the reductio ad absurdum of their own position. It is a logical contradiction. They claim to be victims while holding the megaphone. This is the Ganner bias in action, the cognitive distortion where the oppressor claims the status of the oppressed to gain moral leverage. The reality is that their dissent is subsidized. It is a product, a counterculture manufactured in a lab. Etymologically, culture comes from colere, to till or cultivate. Counterculture is literally against the cultivation. It is the deliberate uprooting of the individual from the transcendental good, true, and beautiful, replacing the organic oak of tradition with the plastic fern of corporate ideology. This Babylon ecosystem, the convergence of woke capital, government bureaucracy, and the academic industrial complex, has created a hell where edgy art is just state propaganda. The punk rocker with pink hair screaming against the system is the system. The feminist demanding equity in the boardroom is merely a shill for the globalist oligarchy that wishes to have the wages of the working man. This is the syllogism of subversion. Cultural Marxism requires the destruction of Western civil society to achieve equity. Globalist corporations fund dissent that attacks Western civil society. Therefore, the modern rebel is merely an unpaid marketing intern for the globalist oligarchy. They are not fighting the man. They are enforcing the will of the managerial class, strangling the life out of the civil society associations that once provided a buffer between the individual and the state. The pathology driving this farce is histrionic personality disorder. The mark of the professional dissident contrasts the screeching activist with the stoic silence of the Western hero. The true man builds, he does not whine. The activist possesses only the rhetoric of grievance, having abandoned the grammar of definition and the logic of causality. Our educational system has been weaponized to produce exactly this: a population of activists easily manipulated by slogans masquerading as moral imperatives. They do not know natural law, they know only current thing. They are the shock troops of the managed consensus, useful idiots who pave the way for their own serfdom. The remedy to this cancer is the restoration of subsidiarity. This ancient and noble principle of the Western canon dictates that affairs should be handled by the smallest, lowest, or least centralized competent authority. We must strip the rebel of his distant, centralized power base. We must force him to survive on his actual merit in a local community, where the men know how to build houses, fix cars, and raise families. When the activist cannot hide behind the corporate HR department or the federal grant, his power evaporates. We must reject the feminization of our culture, the embrace of weakness as a virtue, and re-enshrine the truth. The only true rebellion left in this decaying world is the restoration of the traditional family, the honoring of one's ancestors, and the unapologetic embrace of the the man of excellence. Smash the simulation. Return to the soil. The lawyer, some mid-wit gamma in a Lanjas suit, who hadn't built a damn thing in his life, smirked as he presented his client's grievances. "My client feels unfulfilled. Your Honor, feels." There it was, the feminine imperative wrapped in legal parchment demanding that the state enforce her right to perpetual dissatisfaction. I watched the judge nod solemnly, as if feeling unfulfilled constituted grounds for dismantling a family, as if the marital vow were a consumer warranty to be voided at the first sensation of ennui. This is what happens when solipsism meets statism. The private tribunal of the hypergamous gaze becomes public policy, and the objectively productive man is indicted before a jury of feelings. But to understand why this tribunal exists, to understand why the feminine psyche requires this constant measurement, this eternal comparison against a phantom better option, we must descend into the Jungian depths where the real machinery hums in darkness. The tribunal of the goddess, female projection, and the hypergamous gaze. The ancient Greeks had a word for it: hubris, the overweening pride that precedes nemesis. And what greater hubris exists in our degenerate age than the feminist insistence that woman can judge man while remaining herself immune to judgment? I have sat across courtrooms where this tribunal convenes daily family court, that modern inquisition where the hypergamous gaze is codified into law, where a man's children become leverage in a grotesque marketplace of grievance. The statistics speak with the cold clarity of mathematics. Over 70% of divorces initiated by women, with the rate climbing to nearly 90% among college-educated women. This is not coincidence. This is the tribunal of the goddess operationalized, the state weaponizing female dissatisfaction into a revenue stream for the divorce industrial complex. Consider the evolutionary syllogism that Schopenhauer understood but polite society refuses to acknowledge. Women are the primary selectors of the species. Selection necessitates constant comparison. Comparison implies a tribunal of judgment against which men are perpetually on trial. The conclusion is irrefutable. The female gaze functions as a perpetual courtroom where the defendant cannot call witnesses and the verdict was written before opening arguments. The suppression of this truth constitutes what I call the conspiracy of silence, a gynocentric protection racket that has metastasized into our legal institutions, our universities, and our cultural imagination. You have felt this tribunal in your own relationships, have you not? That peculiar sensation when her eyes drift toward the waiter, the colleague, the fictional character on screen, and you understand with a sinking certainty that you are being weighed on invisible scales against a phantom ideal. This is the hypergamous gaze, the evolutionary imperative to constantly scan for superior genetic and material provision. It is not evil in itself. Nature recognizes no morality, only survival. But the pretense that this gaze does not exist, that women possess some mystical empathy that transcends biological self-interest, represents one of the most damaging lies ever perpetuated upon Western civilization. The Jungian realm becomes visible when viewing the bad boy archetype through the perspective of shadow psychology. Women openly condemn toxic masculinity, yet secretly lubricate for the exact traits, aggression, dominance, chaotic unpredictability, that they profess to hate. This acts as projection in its purest form. The repressed shadow elements of the female spirit, thirst for power, capacity for cruelty, hunger for conquest, fail to integrate, so they are cast onto the bad boy figure, permitting the woman to experience her own darkness vicariously while sustaining the social lie of her moral superiority. Conversely, the good man, the provider, the one who embodies arete and stability, turns into the receptacle for her contempt. He is safe, and safety stands as the enemy of desire. The tribunal demands transgression to preserve its erotic charge. I recall a patient, let us call him Marcus, who embodied this trap perfectly. Engineer, homeowner, faithful husband of 12 years, active in his church, devoted father. His wife left him for an unemployed musician with a criminal record. Her explanation, delivered without a trace of self-awareness: "You're too good. I need someone who makes me feel alive." Marcus was being punished for his virtue. The tribunal had spoken. The musician represented the shadow she refused to acknowledge in herself: chaos, danger, the thrill of potential destruction. Marcus represented order, and order, to the hypergamous imagination, is indistinguishable from boredom. The remedy, and make no mistake, there is a remedy, lies in the ancient Western tradition of the apprenticeship mastery ladder. The Greeks called it techne, the Romans ars, but the principle remains identical across civilizations. A man who achieves genuine excellence in his craft becomes irreplaceable. The tribunal loses its power when the defendant transforms into the judge. A man of true mastery in any field, whether engineering, philosophy, martial arts, or commerce, becomes the standard against which other men are measured. He flips the script of the sexual marketplace. The woman who compares him to hypothetical alternatives finds her comparisons collapsing under the weight of his demonstrated superiority. This is not arrogance. This is the empirical reality of excellence. Consider the formal logic of what red pill theorists call the shit test. Major premise: women test male frame to verify authentic strength versus performed confidence. Minor premise: a man who reacts with insecurity or rage demonstrates the absence of genuine internal stability. Conclusion: the test functions as a legitimate evolutionary filter for character, while simultaneously serving as a potential weapon of manipulation in the hands of a woman lacking virtue. The test itself is neutral. The moral valence depends entirely upon the intention behind it. A woman of character uses such tests unconsciously to ensure her potential mate possesses the fortitude to protect her and their future offspring. A woman corrected by feminist ideology uses them deliberately to undermine and control. This brings us to the solipsism trap and the destruction of true empathy. Feminist ideology has successfully propagated the myth of feminine emotional superiority, that women possess some innate capacity for empathy beyond male comprehension. The dialectical examination reveals precisely the opposite. True empathy requires the ability to inhabit another's perspective objectively, to set aside one's own emotional state and enter the interiority of the other. Female solipsism, the psychological tendency to interpret all experience through the lens of personal feeling, precludes this objectivity. A woman in the grip of solipsistic processing can only empathize with that which mirrors her own emotional state. This is not empathy. This is emotional narcissism dressed in therapeutic language. The implications for justice are catastrophic. A legal system premised upon female testimony as inherently more credible, a system that has institutionalized the Duluth model of domestic violence, that presumes male guilt in sexual assault accusations, that divorces paternal rights from paternal obligations, rests upon a foundation of sand. True justice requires the transcendental virtue of objectivity, the ability to weigh evidence without reference to personal feeling. The feminization of our legal institutions has replaced objectivity with sentiment, evidence with narrative, truth with victimhood hierarchies. The result? A collapse of due process so thorough that the founding fathers would not recognize their own creation. The feminist critique of the so-called virgin whore complex deserves special attention as a case study in ideological inversion. The feminist framing presents this dichotomy as evidence of misogynistic control, a male conspiracy to categorize women into acceptable and unacceptable sexual categories. This interpretation collapses under the slightest logical pressure. The virgin whore distinction represents not hatred but rational heuristic for determining two evolutionarily critical questions: paternity certainty and maternal suitability. A man investing resources in offspring requires reasonable assurance that those offspring carry his genetic material. A man building a household requires a partner capable of modeling virtue for the next generation. These are not social constructs. These are biological imperatives written into the architecture of the human mind across every culture that has ever existed. The data on female unhappiness demolishes the feminist narrative more thoroughly than any philosophical argument could. Despite 5 decades of liberation, despite access to education, careers, contraception, abortion on demand, and the full backing of the cultural apparatus, women's self-reported happiness has declined in absolute terms and relative to men. The freedom to compare and discard mates has produced not fulfillment, but a spiral of dissatisfaction, loneliness, and pharmaceutical dependency. Antidepressant use among women outpaces men by nearly 2 to 1. The feminist project has failed by its own metrics, and rather than acknowledge this failure, the ideological apparatus doubles down, prescribing more feminism as the cure for feminism's failures. We must address directly what I call the evolutionary mismatch, the collision between primitive hypergamous drives and the requirements of civilized society. In the ancestral environment, hypergamy served the species. The woman who constantly scanned for superior mates increased the genetic fitness of her offspring, but in a high-trust civilization premised upon monogamous pair, bonding, unrestrained hypergamy becomes corrosive. It undermines the social contract that allows average men to invest in families rather than competing violently for mating access. It destroys the civil society associations that bind communities together. It converts marriage from a sacred covenant into a temporary arrangement terminable at whim. The West rose to dominance not by liberating hypergamy, but by channeling it through institutional constraints that made civilization possible. The gamma bias operating within the female psyche deserves formal recognition as a cognitive pathology. When a woman compares her current partner to the hypothetical other man, 3 operations occur simultaneously. The strengths of her partner are rendered invisible, his weaknesses are magnified beyond all proportion. And the alternative is idealized as a fantasy unburdened by earthly imperfection. This is not conscious malice, it is the operational structure of hypergamy running its evolutionary program in an environment where it no longer serves adaptive purposes. The man who understands this mechanism can navigate it. The man who remains ignorant will spend his life attempting to prove himself against a phantom. I leave you with this: the tribunal of the goddess is not invincible. It derives its power from male ignorance, from the conspiracy of lies that prevents men from understanding the game being played against them. Knowledge is the antidote, mastery is the defense. Excellence is the counter-argument that needs no words. The Western tradition offers everything required, not the degraded simulacrum taught in universities, but the living wisdom of our ancestors who understood that civilization requires the channeling of instinct into virtue. Break the spell, see the tribunal for what it is, and then, with the cold clarity of a man who has faced the truth, refuse to kneel. What Marcus demonstrated that day was not cleverness, but the ancient discipline of logos, the ordering principle of Western civilization deployed against the forces of chaos. Words are not inert, they are the building blocks of reality, and whoever controls the definitions controls the world. The inquisitors of the modern tribunal do not want dialogue, they want submission, and their vocabulary is designed to strip you of the very language required to resist. But a man armed with dialectic, who understands the structure of argument and the anatomy of manipulation, becomes impervious to their spells. Let us now dissect the weaponry of the enemy and forge the shield of reason that renders it useless. The shield of logos, verbal dominance, and the refutation of the gamma. The Athenian general Themistocles once said that he could not play the lyre, but he could make a small city great. When a purple-haired harpy screeches at you in the public square that you are a beneficiary of patriarchal privilege, you are not facing a philosophical interlocutor. You are facing a tactical opponent whose objective is your destruction. I saw this directly when a colleague of mine, a quiet engineer named Marcus, was cornered at a company town hall by the diversity officer. She demanded he acknowledge his unconscious bias. Marcus simply asked, "What specific action have I taken that demonstrates this bias?" She sputtered. He continued, "And what is the definition of bias you are using?" Within 3 minutes, the woman was shouting incoherently while Marcus sat motionless, having said almost nothing. The Socratic method is not merely pedagogy, it is a weapon. By asking, "How do you know that? And what do you mean by X?" you force the leftists to defend their premises, which they cannot do because their premises are faith-based dogmas derived from resentment rather than reason. Consider the term toxic masculinity through the lens of formal logic. A toxin is a substance that destroys the organism hosting it. Masculinity comprises the virtues of the warrior class: aggression directed toward protection, stoicism in the face of suffering, dominance over chaos. These traits built the Parthenon, the Roman roads, the Magna Carta, and the very legal system that now pathologizes them. To call masculinity toxic is to claim that the immune system is a disease. The syllogism runs thus: major premise, virtues are traits that enable the flourishing of civilization. Minor premise, masculinity comprises aggression, stoicism, and dominance. Conclusion, therefore masculinity is virtuous. The phrase toxic masculinity is an oxymoron designed by cultural Marxists to pathologize the very traits that protect the polis from invasion and disorder. Leadership demands the capacity to remain calm when chaos threatens the city walls. This is not my opinion. This is natural law observed across every civilization that survived long enough to record its history. When a woman or a leftist launches a verbal attack, they introduce social chaos. Your response determines your status. If you become emotional, you fail the test. If you retreat, you fail the test. If you apologize, you announce to the tribe that you are unfit for command. The syllogism is inescapable. Major premise, leadership requires calm under pressure. Minor premise, verbal attacks constitute pressure. Conclusion, therefore maintaining frame is the primary indicator of leadership capacity. This is why the Stoics trained themselves to regard insults as the barking of dogs, pathetic, predictable, and ultimately irrelevant. The agree and amplify tactic operates on the principle that a frame cannot be destroyed from within, it must be exploded from without. When a woman tells you that you are selfish for wanting to spend Saturday with your friends instead of shopping for throw pillows, do not defend yourself. Defense is the posture of the guilty. Instead, agree and amplify. You are correct. In fact, I have already booked a one-way ticket to Bali and plan to live in a tree house with no throw pillows whatsoever. Watch her face. The shit test collapses because you have demonstrated immunity to her opinion. This is not mockery. This is the transcendental good manifested as strength. A man who requires the validation of others is a slave to their disapproval. The free man amplifies the accusation to its absurd conclusion, revealing the accusation itself as absurd. The gamma male represents a specific pathology that Western civilization once kept in check through apprenticeship, hierarchy, and the mastery ladder. The gamma is articulate but effeminate. He wields language not to discover truth through dialectic, but to enforce social conformity through rhetoric. His wit is a prosthetic for physical courage. He is the soy-faced journalist who writes snarky takedowns of men who could break him over their knees. The Greeks had a word for this: sophist. The sophists were not philosophers. They were paid rhetoricians who taught wealthy young men how to win arguments regardless of truth. Socrates destroyed them by asking simple questions they could not answer. The modern gamma falls to the same blade. Ask him to define his terms. Watch him squirm. The notion of hate speech functions as a pseudo-legal fabrication intended to monopolize discourse. The First Amendment includes no hate speech exception because the framers recognized that the ability to define hate confers the power to silence opposition. Critical theorists coined the term upon realizing they could not win debates on substance. Examine the mechanics, asserting that women are on average more neurotic than men, a point supported by 50 years of cross-cultural psychological research, results in accusations of hate speech. Yet hate is an emotion, not an argument. The veracity of a proposition bears no connection to the feelings it generates. The Enlightenment established due process for ideas, present evidence, face counter-evidence, and allow the strongest reasoning to prevail. Hate speech bypasses this mechanism by branding specific conclusions heretical before the evidence is weighed. Such a system offers no safety. It constitutes tyranny. The verbal shit test follows predictable linguistic structures. First, the rhetorical question. So you think women should just stay in the kitchen? This is a framing attack designed to associate your position with a straw man. Second, the mocking tone. Oh, so you're one of those guys. This is status manipulation designed to lower your social position. Third, the strawman attribution. You just hate women. This is mind-reading fallacy combined with moral grandstanding. Each of these attacks operates on the same principle: bypass reason and trigger an emotional response. The trained man recognizes these patterns the way a general recognizes enemy formations. He does not become angry. He becomes precise. The word articulate has been corrupted. The modern usage suggests fluency, the ability to produce many words, but the Latin articulus means a joint, a connection, a precise point of linkage. To be articulate is to join thought to speech with mechanical precision. The trivium, grammar, logic, rhetoric was designed to produce this quality. Grammar ensures your words mean what you intend. Logic ensures your propositions follow from one another. Rhetoric ensures your message reaches its target. The gamma is fluent but not articulate. He produces many words that signify nothing. The red-pilled man says little, but each sentence lands like a javelin. A man who cannot defend his position verbally, cannot defend his family physically. The tongue and the sword are trained by the same discipline. The mixed constitution of the male psyche contains both the capacity for violence and the discipline to restrain it. This is not contradiction, this is tension. The string of a bow must be pulled taut to launch the arrow. The man who cannot fight is a sheep. The man who cannot restrain himself is a wolf. The civilized man is a sheepdog, dangerous to predators, gentle to the flock. Silence is the marker of this tension. The man who has mastered logos speaks when speech serves truth and holds his tongue when it does not. He does not fill the air with noise because he is uncomfortable with silence. He is the silence. And in that silence, the enemies of civilization hear their own doom approaching. But this psychological warfare operation relies entirely on the fraudulent premise that the pre-literate world was a paradise of wisdom ruined by the arrival of the West. I identify this as the cynical noble savage. Rhetoric, a marketing ploy designed to weaponize primitivism against the technological and moral superiority of the civilization that built the very podium from which these charlatans preach. They demand that you trade the logos, the living spirit of progress and reason, for the stagnant animism of ancestor worship, arguing that subservience to environmental determinism is superior to the conquest of nature. The desecration of the real ethnic mysticism and the suicide of the West. Consider the absurdity of the modern land acknowledgement, that peculiar ritual of secular penance where a polished bureaucrat stands in an air-conditioned skyscraper built by the engineering genius of Western civilization, powered by electricity harnessed by Faraday and Tesla, and sanitized by the germ theory of Pasteur to announce that we are standing on stolen land. It is a ritual of occult submission, a demoralization campaign designed not to honor the past, but to dispossess the present. By forcing you to chant that your presence is a crime, the cultural Marxist aims to inculcate a false sense of guilt, severing your connection to the territory your forefathers conquered and settled. This is not humility. It is a psychological warfare operation intended to destroy civil society associations and render you a stranger in your own home, softening you up for the final economic and spiritual looting. The hilarious, terrifying irony is that these self-proclaimed anti-racist academics have simply reinvented the blood and soil ethnic essentialism of the 20th century's worst totalitarian regimes, merely inverting the preferred races. They preach that your identity, your worth, and your soul are determined entirely by your melanin count or your ancestry, reducing the complexity of the human individual to a mere biological accident. This is the noble savage rhetoric weaponized, a cynical marketing ploy to utilize primitivism against the technological and moral superiority of the West. They idolize the pre-literate traditions that lacked the trivium, grammar, logic, and rhetoric, and therefore lacked the very tools for objective knowledge, ignoring the reality that the indigenous way of life was one of constant tribal warfare, starvation, and submission to environmental determinism, not a paradise lost. We must dismantle the pseudo-academic field of indigenous epistemologies and ethnic studies by applying the steel axe of the law of non-contradiction. These charlatans argue that truth is socially constructed and that reality changes based on one's ethnicity or feelings, a philosophy known as subjectivism, which is the intellectual cancer killing the West. A simple syllogism destroys this grift. Major premise: truth is the correspondence of the mind to reality, the definition of veritas. Minor premise: reality exists independently of the observer's ethnicity. Conclusion: therefore ethnic truth is a contradiction in terms. There is only the truth. When a bridge collapses, it does not matter if the engineer prays to the sun god or worships the equity dashboard. The laws of physics, rooted in the transcendentals, demand adherence to the good, true, and beautiful, or they deliver death. This leads us to the living spirit versus the ancestor. The Western concept of progress through reason stands in stark contrast to the animistic stasis of ancestor worship. Our ancestors forged the apprenticeship mastery ladder, creating a system where a man could transcend his birth station through competence and virtue, leading to the conquest of nature and the stars. The ethnic studies grift, however, is a product of failed intellectuals who could not survive the rigors of the real world. They sell tribal resentment as a product to shield themselves from the harsh truth that they produce nothing of value. They seek to drag us back into the crab bucket of identity politics, where no crab is allowed to escape, because the escape of one implies the failure of the collective. The remedy to this degeneration is the reassertion of the Roman concept of virtus and the Stoic concept of the cosmopolitan, the citizen of the cosmos. Your identity is not forged by your DNA, but by your adherence to natural law and your ability to wield reason. We must reject the fragmentation of identity politics and return to the unified vision of Western civilization, a culture where men judge one another not by the color of their skin or their victim status, but by the substance of their character, defined here as the alignment of one soul with divine order. Major premise: Western civilization is the only system in history to codify due process and natural law for all citizens. Minor premise: critical race theory rejects universalism in favor of tribalism. Conclusion: therefore, the rejection of Western civilization is a rejection of the only mechanism that prevents constant, bloody tribal warfare. Choose virtus, reject the tribe, and reclaim the mantle of the real. You have walked through fire to arrive at this clearing of truth, and if your lungs burn, good, that is the sensation of lies evacuating your body. The biological cuckoldry rate sits between 10 and 30% depending on the study. Family courts strip fathers of children in over 80% of custody cases. Male suicide outpaces female suicide 3 to 4 times over, and the modern independent woman who demands your submission while cashing your tax dollars is not liberation, it is parasitism wrapped in empowerment branding. These are not opinions, these are census data, court records, death certificates. The cathedral of lies constructed by cultural Marxists and their feminist handmaidens cannot survive contact with a single honest man who refuses to kneel before the golden calf of gynocentrism. You now possess what they fear most, the trivium as weapon, natural law as shield, and the unshakable knowledge that Western civilization, this miraculous inheritance of Aristotle and Augustine, and the men who built cathedrals to the transcendental good, was not an accident, but an achievement of your forefathers who refused to accept darkness as final. You know now that dissent sold by corporations is manufactured obedience, that the female gaze judges without mercy and selects without gratitude, that verbal frame separates the commander from the commanded. That ethnic grievance campaigns are admission tickets for the incompetent who cannot climb the apprenticeship mastery ladder on merit alone. You have been unplugged from the matrix of managed consensus. Your ancestors are smiling down upon you. Now go find another sleeping man and wake him the same way I woke you. And now the sponsored book introduction, The Modern Man's Guide to Life. You're holding a book that will piss off the wrong people. Good. Let me tell you why that's a feature, not a bug. My name's Conrad Riker. I'm not a professor, a politician, or a life coach. I'm a man who watched his father work 70-hour weeks to provide for a family that dissolved the moment his paycheck stopped. I've been divorced twice, lost custody of my kids to a system that treats fathers like ATMs, and spent years trapped in a cubicle under fluorescent lights that drained my will to fight. Then I asked a question modern men aren't allowed to voice. When did survival become surrender? This book isn't therapy. It's a battle plan. Modern convenience didn't free men, it castrated us. That washing machine in your garage? It didn't just clean clothes, it laundered your purpose. The pill didn't liberate women, it turned sex into a transaction where men overpay. No-fault divorce laws didn't empower wives. They created a 150 billion alimony industry funded by broken fathers. Your office job? A zoo enclosure for hunters, central heating, a cozy cage for warriors. Every advance since 1950 has neutered masculinity while selling you soy lattes and sensitivity training as consolation prizes. I've spent a decade tracking the data they don't teach in gender studies, how testosterone levels crashed 1% yearly since 1980, why 73% of divorces are filed by women who keep the house and kids, and why bicycles did more to destroy chivalry than any feminist manifesto. You'll learn why tampons fueled corporate feminism's rise, how air conditioning made men soft, and why your gym membership is the last stand against estrogenic processed food. This book is for men who want answers, not applause. If you're content being a tax donkey for ex-wives, a desk jockey for HR zealots, or a ally who apologizes for existing, close this, now go binge Netflix. Buy a scented candle. The rest of you, steel yourself. We're dissecting 12 inventions that gutted male authority and rebuilding a playbook to reclaim it. No platitudes, no compromise. Just biology, history, and the cold math of survival. You weren't born to beg. Let's fix that. The Modern Man's Guide to Life. Written by Conrad Riker. Buy now. Links in description.